Okay. If no one, I think Ara has questions.
Okay.
Ara, please show yourself.
Hi, Jason. Probably this the last question here for today. I'm really interested in your first two maps. Could you just speak a little bit more about the financialization of the agrochemicals, especially whether there's a split between how the state might finance agrochemicals compared to how companies might contribute more to that sector?
Okay. I love this question. I love this question a whole bunch. So you know that old quote, like, Mexico, poor Mexico, so far from God, so close to the United States. It really does hit home with agrochemicals because um, the United States is the agrochemical center of the world, right? So studying Mexico's agrochemical industry oftentimes was very nationalistic, economically nationalistic, in response to the preponderant influence of the U.S. agricultural agrochemical industry. That makes sense, right? Like so from the very onset, one, Mexico is flooded with U.S. mining industries, engineering firms that all like have these like side businesses of making chemicals, right? Like, so you have this engineering, this mining industry, and they like have their byproduct was arsenic, and like, oh yeah, we'll sell some of it to, some of the window makers. We'll sell some of it to, Sherwin-Williams. And Sherwin-Williams was setting up shop in Mexico, saying like, oh yeah, we'll sell paint and agrochemicals, sure, right? We have all the chemicals here. So really, before the 1940s and the rise of DDT, with you really see most of the arsenicals and like nicotine based and lead based chemicals in Mexico. Most of those are actually run by US, German, British companies that are already doing types of industrial work in Mexico, and they're just having these byproducts and they're just selling them. And one thing I think is really interesting is that if you look at the Mexican industry, Mexico was creating fertilizers. So Mexico had all of these minerals, right? And they had these huge phosphate mines. They had these huge sulfur mines. They had these huge calcium mines, and they were creating different types of fertilizers, right? And they were always presenting this narrative of like, 400 years of colonization, and now the United States, like we have to rejuvenate our it's really interesting because I think there's this whole like United States kills things, Mexico brings things back. It's really weird. Like if you look at the 1930s, it's like Mexico's only fertilizer companies, United States and Germany have all the Mexican pesticides. But then it shifts, right? In the 1940s, it shifts, and Mexico starts to invest in its own arsenic for its own chemicals. And I was actually just talking to a scholar in Spain yesterday about how the same thing happened in fascist Spain, right? So when they got cut off from their U.S. supply of lead arsenate, they were like, we have arsenic mines in northern Spain and lead mines in southern Spain. We can do this, and it became this whole kind of fascist like element. That fascism didn't exist in Mexico, but the economic nationalism bit did, right? Where it was like, as we found these, I think it was by 1947, Mexico starts creating its first major chemical companies. And by 69, there's debated because, like, again, Mexico, like, it doesn't have pesticide companies. It has fertilizer companies that make pesticides. Again, this is super, super strange. And I don't really understand it because Mexico's track record for like creating biological controls is really strong, but its track record for letting all the pesticides slip is also really really bad. And the last thing I'll say is the old narrative used to be that starting in the 1970s when the United States banned DDT, it didn't stop manufacturing DDT. and that it only started sending DDT and other organochlorinates elsewhere, right? That's the old narrative. And that narrative holds up. The narrative's not incorrect. I'm not here to refute it, right? But I think one thing that's important too is I think that these companies also created their own chemicals, right? So another thing that's important that the US South was probably the largest chemical center in the United States. So I was born in Baltimore, which Baltimore was the agrochemical center of the United States, produced all of them, right? But there was always surplus, especially as US consumers started changing what they wanted in the 1970s and 1980s. So they were always sending their surplus to different developing worlds, right? Developing countries, right? And for that reason, a lot of these chemical companies, and this is the state and the chemical companies they're working with, had to figure out how to use their domestic chemicals. So one thing that's really happening in Costa Rica right now is people are seeing that while Costa Rica produces some of the most organic fruits and vegetables for the world, that its domestic crops receive a disproportionate amount of chemicals. And the question is that economic? Like, is it like using them because they have them, right? And I think that's something that's happening in Mexico too, is because of the history of the United States just experimenting in Mexico with chemicals, and the history of the United States just flooding Mexico with chemicals, and Mexico trying to hit back with their own chemicals. Mexico just has this surplus of chemicals. So Mexico, just like Spain, becomes the large exporter of chemicals throughout Latin America. But I also think that they serve their population a disproportionate amount of agrochemicals in their own food. And that's another nutritional bit that comes full circle.
All right.
Make sense?
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. That's a really fabulous answer. All right. I think that was our last questions for today. If you still have questions or want to discuss more with Jayson, I suggest you to follow him on Twitter, where he super active there. So you probably have like a chance to, interact more with Jayson. Right, Jayson?
I mean, I would prefer an email if you want to interact.
All right. Email then.
The Twitter flood is too crazy these days.
All right.
So an email if you want to have a conversation.
All right. You hear him, like email. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jayson. That was really fantastic. Thank you all participants for joining us today. I should remind you guys, this is our first episode, so more will come, and I will share this again once more. Next month we will have Pepe Perdana Putri, who will talk about the remaking gender without flipping the script, socio-ecological limits of undoing gender in post-conflict community. I guess this is from her fieldwork in Indonesia. So please stay tuned to our events. We try to make this monthly, every Wednesday. So yeah, we hope to see you there. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.